The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I don't know whether to call this projection, distraction, disinformation, whataboutism, ad hominem, straw manning, or just stupidity. And maybe sometimes the simplest explanation is actually the best one. In the middle of an investigation looking into possible illegal coordination with Russia during the 2016 campaign, that investigation, as a reminder, has already brought close to 20 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and potentially many, many more. Donald Trump is now accusing American ally Germany and Chancellor Angela Merkel of being Russian puppets and captives of the Russians. So some backstory is sort of required to understand this, but even the backstory doesn't change that this is about as dumb as it sounds at face value. We've got the NATO summit going on in Brussels, Belgium. Yesterday, beautiful city of Brussels, one of my favorites. If you're ever there, have the seafood at Nordsee, have the ramen at Umamido. Trust me on that, folks. Believe me. Beautiful city of Brussels, Belgium, NATO summit. Trump goes on a seemingly unprovoked anti-German tirade. And why not, right? He's alienated Canada. He's alienated France. He's alienated the United Kingdom. Germany is kind of the logical next country that you would go out of your way to alienate. And Trump shows up completely out of control and accuses Germany of being, quote, a captive of the Russians, effectively Russian puppets. Why did he say this? Because of an energy deal. And I'm going to let him explain. We're going to play the video. If you're watching, check out former Senator and current U.S. Representative to NATO, Kay Bailey Hutchison. The look on her face says a lot here. Check out Mike Pompeo on Trump's left, looking physically in pain as Donald Trump makes this horrible, horrible diplomatic faux pas. And then look at Chief of Staff John Kelly to Trump's far right on the other side of Kay Bailey Hutchison over here. He just straight up looks away at one point and then at another point starts chugging water, nobody knowing how to react to this just very bizarre, unhinged tirade from Trump. Take a listen to it.
Well, I have to say, I think it's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries. And then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened. But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they will be getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline.
Wrong.
And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not.
Wow, just wow. And then the actual diplomats in the room try to sort of soften the entire thing. And Trump actually just interrupts extraordinarily rudely with even more complaints.
We have always been able to unite around our core task to protect and defend each other because we understand that we are stronger together than apart. I think that 2 world wars and the Cold War taught us that we are stronger together than apart.
But how can you be together when a country is getting its energy from the person you want protection against or from the group that you want protection?
Because we understand that when we stand together, also when dealing with Russia, we are stronger. I think what we have seen is that...
No, you're just making Russia richer. Well, you're not dealing with Russia, you're making Russia richer.
So I'm not doing this story to try to convince Trumpists that this is really bad for the United States' reputation around the world. The Trumpists are going to see this and they're going to think this is great. This is Trump being tough. This is Trump not backing down. This is embarrassing around the world. The entire world is laughing at us because we have effectively a child here who doesn't even know what the hell he's talking about. It's, first of all, just not true that as a result of this energy deal, Russia is going to get, or Germany rather, is going to get 60 or 70% of its energy from Russia. Like, it's just flat out untrue. Number two, Trump hired as his Secretary of State a guy whose entire claim to fame, his entire career, Rex Tillerson, as CEO of ExxonMobil, was the making of deals with countries like Russia for energy, right? And now all of a sudden, energy deals with Russia are the problem and are indicative of being a captive of Russia. And then lastly, the right-wingers are off the rails on this one. And as soon as reasonable people on the left and right say, hey, you know, this is bad, this is untrue, it's bad diplomacy, there's people on the right who are saying, wait a second, now you like Russia and you're in favor of Germany doing deals with Russia, but when Trump simply says it might be good to have a better relationship with Russia, he's colluding? No, no, no. A deal with Russia for energy and a pipeline, and by the way, we're talking about Russian companies, not even the government necessarily, that's not collusion or obstruction of justice or doing Russia's bidding. You could be against the deal, right? You could say it would be better not to do these deals with Russia and Russian companies. You could point out this is, you know, we're against fossil fuels. We should be moving against fossil fuels. You can be against the specifics of the deal, but you still recognize that this is not what Trump is accused of having done and is being investigated for.
It's all projection, isn't it? Because Trump is the one with countless ties to Russia.
Yes.
It reminds me of one of the debates between him and Hillary Clinton, where he said, no puppet, no puppet, you're the puppet. That's exactly what he's doing here.
I think at the beginning I said, is this projection, stupidity, whatever. I think it is stupidity and ignorance, but it is also on some level projection, which is Trump panicking and trying to just blame anybody he can of what he now maybe is recognizing he may be guilty of himself. And this has the maybe inadvertent impact of being really good for Angela Merkel. Merkel is in a really tough electoral situation in Germany. And Trump, by doing this, positions her to respond, which she did, saying she remembers the Soviet occupation. She's the last one who should be lectured about doing business with Russia. This is good for Merkel within Germany. I don't know that Trump recognizes or necessarily even cares about that. And as far as Trump's behavior, we owe an apology to the rest of the world. And the right and Trump, they don't want apologies. They say weaklings apologize and strong leaders don't. Stop doing things that require apologies if you don't want people demanding apologies anymore.
Yeah, these are our allies, and you can call them out for sure, but do so behind closed doors, not out in public. It's just embarrassing for everyone.
Thinking, even behind closed doors, you wouldn't necessarily see this level of direct disrespect and sort of callousness towards allies. And Trump is doing this in front of cameras. So we have this horribly embarrassing faux pas of Donald Trump starting to badger people at the NATO summit and say Russia is holding Germany captive. And then after this goes on, we now have this going in the direction that is exactly where many people predicted it would go, which is that Donald Trump is threatening to pull the United States out of NATO altogether. We've seen this very up and down relationship between Trump and NATO. First, it wasn't really clear Trump knew what NATO actually was. It's actually still not completely clear that he does. It doesn't seem that he knows who does what for whom. Does he want to stay in? Does he want to get out? He initially made some anti-NATO comments, including during the presidential debates with Hillary Clinton, or maybe even the Republican primary debates. Then later he said, no, we want to be a part of NATO. And then now reportedly making threats for the United States to go it alone, leaving NATO altogether. So let's kind of build this up so we all are on the same page. What is NATO? NATO is a treaty organization based on an agreement from the late 1940s, I think 1949. And it now includes 29 countries in North America and Europe. And the main point of it is what's called collective defense. What the NATO member countries agree to do is mutually defend each other if and when there are attacks from external countries, countries that are not part of the 29 countries. So if one member country is attacked, like Germany, the United States is saying, as part of this NATO agreement, we will come to Germany's defense. We don't need to get into all the details, but needless to say, Trump's big gripe with NATO has been that some countries aren't paying their fair share. And as Trump describes it, this is because there are these spending targets that countries are supposed to aspire to. They're not binding in reality. And Trump doesn't like that some countries, including Germany, haven't increased their NATO contributions as much as Trump believes that they are actually bound to do. And reports are that Trump completely derailed the meeting just hours ago in the early afternoon, Central European time, very, very early in the morning here, and started making demands, which, depending on which version of the story you believe, might include a demand that members report to Trump by January how they are going to reach their spending targets. Can you imagine Trump showing up and saying, everybody here report to me by January when you're going to spend more money on this? Other reports include that Trump threatened to, quote, do our own thing, or to, quote, go it alone if things aren't to his liking by some completely arbitrary date that he appears to be trying to set. He was later asked, did you threaten to pull out of NATO, or was that not what you meant to do? He didn't answer that, but he said he believes if he wanted to pull out of NATO unilaterally, that he would be able to do it without getting congressional approval. This is an absolute train wreck. This is, first of all, Trump bullying. Who the F is Trump, quite frankly, to start making these demands and to take over the summit with these completely bogus and arbitrary impositions of requirements on the other countries? Number two, this is particularly dangerous because Trump's followers are clueless about most of the stuff Trump has strong opinions on. So, like, trade is a good example. Trump knows nothing about trade. His supporters seemingly know just as little. During the campaign, Trump espoused an unbelievable amount of uninformed trade rhetoric, which actually succeeded at convincing his followers that he knows what he's doing. He then gets into office, starts a trade war with our allies that he can't win, and his supporters actually think that this is good. They think that this is going to be a good thing. It's the same thing that's likely to happen here. Trump picks on NATO during the campaign, something he and his followers know very, very little about. He will now say, hey, I might pull out and I can pull out unilaterally if I want to. And his supporters will, of course, say, great, do it. You're the boss here. Don't be pushed around. Pull out of NATO. And then, of course, what you have to remember is that no one would like the United States to leave NATO more than who? Vladimir Putin and Russia. The United States leaving NATO, even just making the threat to leave NATO, even saying if I wanted to pull out, I could do it just on my say-so. This is what Putin wants. And huge coincidence, it's not Sri Lanka that wants the United States out of NATO. It's not Equatorial Guinea or New Zealand. Russia would love the United States out of NATO. Just a coincidence, right? I mean, it's never one of those other countries. And lastly, there's the legal question. Can Trump leave NATO unilaterally? Unclear. I'm hopeful that we won't actually need to dig that deep on that issue because I'm hoping Trump isn't actually going to try to do it. But legal opinion is divided. And if Trump did need congressional approval, you can bet that a really great thing to stop him from getting that would be voting in 2018, voting in November of 2018. So it is yet another reason to vote in November if you're concerned about the anti-NATO stuff that is going on. Embarrassment after embarrassment during this NATO summit. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to send a very sincere and heartfelt thank you to Carol Moore, who's today's new David Pakman Show member of the day. Also want to say thanks to Mike O'Brien. Mike O'Brien, not the one I went to high school with. There was a very infamous person in my high school named Mike O'Brien, who actually lives here in Boston now. He's not a member, just to be absolutely clear. That is not who I'm thanking. I'm thanking someone else who has the same name.
Surprising, because that's not really a common name, Mike O'Brien.
I know,
right?
especially in Boston.
Billion?
Especially in Boston, it's not a name that you would hear very often. Michael's been with us since 2012 as a member. Join Carol and Michael by signing up at www.joinpakman.com. Okay, we have nearly 7,000 viewers and listeners who now are subscribers to the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/reddit. You can discuss politics and news and current events and philosophy and culture, really whatever you want, with other viewers and listeners respectfully. We don't allow overt trolling on the subreddit. Few notable discussions that I spotted this morning, starting with one about YouTube's new plan for promoting and funding authoritative news. So the idea, as I understand it, and there's a Wired article that was linked to, is that YouTube is going to handpick channels that they believe provide, as the name says, authoritative news, and to give them funding to expand. And of course, this is simultaneously very exciting if you're going to be one of the channels chosen, but also very concerning to some because of the idea that there is going to be some central clearinghouse on such a major platform like YouTube, which will decide what are the news outlets that can be trusted in some way. Now, I am trying to get us into this, of course. I'm talking to our YouTube rep, and I told her very directly, we want to be a part of this. I don't know how these channels are going to be selected. As far as we've been told, Pat, no decision has been made yet exactly, but my interest was going to be passed along the right channel. So hopefully, it's one of these things where I'm concerned about it, but I also, if YouTube is doing it, we want to be a part of it for sure.
Yeah, we got to stay consistent on this, right? Like if we're selected, it's a great thing, but if we're not selected, it's an abomination.
It's like jobs numbers. It's jobs numbers. Before Trump was president, you couldn't trust jobs numbers, and now that he is, and the jobs numbers are pretty good or good enough, they're really reliable numbers. It's the same thing. This is absolutely atrocious for YouTube to do, unless we're included, in which case, fantastic initiative. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, do we really want Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to be an election issue? The argument made here by this user on the subreddit is that it may actually be a backfire for Democrats to try to make the confirmation an election issue. And generally speaking, the idea is that if you consider that in 2016, given the exact same situation, it didn't work out particularly well for Democrats, that maybe it wouldn't work out that well to oppose in any way possible the Kavanaugh confirmation this time either. I kind of disagree because the Democrats actually failed to really carry it out to its full conclusion and do what they could to push through, if it would have been possible, the Merrick Garland confirmation hearing. So I just disagree. And the polling of our own audience of leftists suggested it would be great for Democrats to oppose the confirmation.
I guess one argument would be that it's futile, right? Because it looks like Kavanaugh's going to get through either way.
Yes.
And then you're wetting your gunpowder. You got to save some of that political capital for other issues and let this one be.
The problem with that is that if you can actually take over the House and Senate in November and successfully delay the confirmation hearings long enough, you actually might be able to prevent the confirmation from happening. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I could be convinced either way. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, we did on the bonus show a story about Starbucks eliminating plastic straws, and we generally said it's a good thing, but it's mostly for PR for Starbucks. And there have been a number of articles that have been pointed have been pointed out to me, including one which explains that actually plastic straws, the kind that Starbucks is getting rid of, are really important for people with certain disabilities who have trouble drinking otherwise. And I genuinely did not know too much about this. And I guess I continue not to know enough about it to know whether the replacement proposal from Starbucks presents a problem for people who, for health reasons, need to drink from plastic straws. But I admit, this is not an issue I knew very much about.
Yeah, probably so. They're going to do that adult sippy cup thing.
Yeah.
So, I'd imagine some people with disabilities won't be able to use that. They'll need the straw.
Yeah.
I wonder what Starbucks will do. Maybe keep some in the back, available upon request.
Here's a serious question. Is not providing plastic straws arguably a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act if it's so crucial a thing to people who need a plastic straw to drink? I don't know the answer. I'm genuinely asking these questions, and I do plan to look into more about this. And lastly, disgusting David's dirty carbon footprint. This is the second or third subreddit thread where people are alleging that we are not an environmentally friendly show because we have lights in the studio, we have televisions in the studio which consume power, because I sometimes fly on airplanes. And you know what I have to say? This is obvious trolling, and I don't even think we should engage with it. Like, could someone do you think that these are serious criticisms, that our program is actually counter to the pro-environmental narrative because we own listen, I could sit in a completely dark room. We could really reduce the energy consumption of the show. Is that a show anybody would watch? We would save power.
Yeah, we could just not have a show at all, for that matter. I wonder if this person is, totally environmentally friendly, doesn't drive, doesn't eat meat, any of that stuff, because otherwise they're throwing stones from a glass house, it sounds like.
Even if you only eat lentils, which have a relatively low carbon impact, it's still not zero, right? So like, what are we talking about here? And this just seems like someone who has a lot of free time, I think is what I would say. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. When we talk about the crisis involving the separation of migrant kids at the border from their parents and the subsequent caging and internment camps of children, a couple of common arguments actually from the right, from the defenders of the policy are, number one, when you commit a crime in the United States, even as an American citizen, you don't go to prison or jail with your kids. So the separation really isn't a big deal. Second argument is they are breaking the law after all. This, of course, ignores that illegally crossing into the United States the first time you do it is only a civil offense. And it also ignores that seeking asylum at the border isn't a crime at all. But okay, the defenders of the policy will sometimes make that argument. We've also heard another argument from the defenders of this policy, who say that it doesn't matter what the Constitution says because the Constitution only applies to U.S. citizens, not to people who are trying to come into the United States. This ignores that actually much of the Constitution does apply to all persons, although there are some specific parts which apply only to U.S. citizens, but we're going to put that aside for now as well. This is now being turned up a notch. The Trump administration has admitted that they have separated a family who appear to be United States citizens for up to what seems to be a period of a year. I believe that everybody should be treated with respect. I am not pointing this out because I think it is worse to do this to U.S. citizens than to non-citizens in some kind of moral sense. But it does immediately deflate one of the arguments that we have heard from the American right and the defenders of the policy. The Department of Justice said to a federal judge this week that it appears to have separated a father and toddler, both of whom appear to be American citizens, as part of the enforcement of this policy. And as I've been telling you, the administration was supposed to have all 5 years of age and under kids reconnected with their families by Tuesday. That didn't happen. They were told that in that case, they need to account for the whereabouts of every single one of these cases. During the hearing about that, the Trump administration said that one of the 27 cases where reunification wasn't currently feasible is a case where the parent's location has been unknown for more than a year, and records show that the parent and child might be American citizens. The government lost track of the parent. The kid is in custody at one of these facilities for migrant children, and they both appear to be American citizens. We should all be asking, wait a second. This case with the citizens has been going on for a year. We only found out about it because of the escalation of the policy, which led to a reunification deadline, which led to the DOJ having to explain what's going on with each kid. How long was this going to be kept secret? Were it not for the judge saying, hey, DOJ, you've got to account for every one of these kids. And most shockingly, this isn't as rare as you think. ICE is the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Department organization. And based on a report by Vice in 2016, not only does ICE sometimes detain U.S. citizens, they sometimes deport U.S. citizens. There is a report which suggests from Northwestern that in 2010, more than 4,000 U.S. citizens were detained or deported as aliens. Maybe a stupid question, but if someone's an American citizen, which country do you deport them to? In most cases, it's Mexico, as it was in 2010. And all we need to remember is that Trump wanted to suspend due process for people believed to be in the country illegally. He casually tweeted about it. We're deporting some U.S. citizens. If anything, we need to slow down the process, not speed it up.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that the U.S. citizens who are deported are of Hispanic or Latino descent. And you know, what's the way to stop this from happening, right? Are they supposed to keep some documentation in their pocket, maybe present their U.S. passport upon request?
Show us your papers at any time. You need to have your full documentation with you at any time. And why do I think that wouldn't actually solve the problem? They'd still figure out some way to explain why that's not that's just not going to be sufficient. I hope that this will be a dark stain on American history, and the phrase of the day is slow creep. Authoritarianism doesn't happen all at once. It is a slow creep, and we are seeing it. So Donald Trump went to Singapore to negotiate with North Korea's Kim Jong-Un. Kim made the same vague promises that prior North Korean leaders had made and not held up their end of the bargain with regard to the agreements that are reached. Donald Trump called it a victory, bragged about the nuclear threat is over, bragged about this massive deal that he made, and then, of course, nothing happened, and nobody heard from North Korea for 10 or 14 days. None of the remains of American soldiers were returned, which was maybe the one notable element of the agreement that had been made. But we were told that any second the progress will happen because Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is going to go to North Korea. He's going to get it done, get some results, and start bringing home those remains of U.S. soldiers. Well, Pompeo went, and Kim Jong-Un blew off the scheduled one-on-one meeting with the Trump Secretary of State and went to a rural potato farm instead to speak inspirationally to North Korean potato farmers. You couldn't possibly create a more condescending and ridiculous way to show your complete lack of concern for your relationship with the United States than bailing on a one-on-one meeting with the Secretary of State to go to a place where they grow potatoes to chat with farmers. And Pompeo was there. He was supposed to have this meeting. He was in Pyongyang right after this supposedly historic deal, which represented newfound willingness and inspirational dedication from Kim Jong-un to fixing the problems of the relationship with the United States. Kim Jong-un never showed up. They sent a deputy of his instead to meet with Pompeo, and we now have pictures of Kim Jong-un in this rural area, dressed in his, I don't know what you call those, his best whites, his bleached whites, providing guidance to potato farmers. Clearly the actions of a guy very eager to deal with the United States, right?
What guidance can he even offer to potato farmers? That's what I'm wondering.
He knows about everything. He knows about golfing. He knows about nuclear energy. He knows about potato farming. I think that his father was known to be proficient in animal husbandry as well.
Doesn't he bowl a 300 every time too, Kim Jong-un?
Either that or holes in one the first time he played golf, or he was speaking fluent Korean at 1 year of age or something like that. Who knows? In the meantime, Pompeo's meetings with whoever was left to meet with him were a total disaster. After the meetings, North Korea referred to them as regrettable and filled with gangster-like demands from Pompeo. Could this trip have gone any worse? And a source close to this trip by Pompeo said that, quote, the North Koreans were just messing around, not serious about moving forward, which is what every reasonable person has said. From the beginning, every reasonable person has said they're not serious. They're simply not serious about moving forward on this.
Yeah, you could have anticipated this, but maybe Pompeo and Trump thought that a new page had been turned.
Yes.
I don't know.
They've turned over a new leaf.
Turned over a new leaf. I think that sounds a little bit naive, though, don't you think?
It sounds more than a little bit naive. And there's a senior fellow and director of the Defense Posture Project at the Federation of American Scientists. It's quite a mouthful. His name is Adam Mount. He says this is a dead end. Like, this is going nowhere. It's over. And even the mere idea that this is going to proceed as Donald Trump reported to us that it would is a laughable joke at this time. Could we even invent a way that this could have gone any worse? Like, is there anything Kim Jong-un could have done during this visit by Pompeo that would have been worse than bailing on the meeting and going to a potato farm?
Maybe if he brought Pompeo to the potato farm with him and had him start working the fields.
I think that is one of the few ways that this could have actually been worse. Send me your thoughts. If anybody still thinks this is going somewhere, please let me know.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today we are continuing with our pseudoscience mini-series. Today's episode is going to look at I don't even know if it's pseudoscience, it's really just not science, of astrology. I know that I am going to get some angry emails for every single one of these pseudoscience episodes, but let's get right into it. Astrology for your listening and viewing pleasure. Let's talk about astrology. In the simplest sense, astrology means the search for human meaning in the sky. Astrology is a belief system and practice which claims that the movement and positions of celestial bodies like stars and planets and the moon can give us answers about what's happening on Earth and can make predictions about what will happen on Earth and in human lives. Astrologers believe that the movement and positioning of celestial bodies even have an effect on human personalities and behavior. So an astrologer might assert that it wasn't a coincidence that someone died during a full moon, or that a person is likely to make good decisions in their love life this week because they were born on a certain day in March 50 years ago. The problem with astrology is common to other pseudosciences. It's not based on evidence. Astrological claims are usually not falsifiable or even testable. Astrology hasn't been proven right, but in some respects, it can't even be proven wrong, which should always be a red flag. So first of all, astrology is not to be confused with astronomy, which is the actual scientific study of celestial bodies and everything in space. Astrology holds the belief that everything happening in space has a direct causal relationship with human events. A number of ancient societies had their own versions of astrology in Mesoamerica, India, China, Greece and Rome, Babylonia, parts of the Middle East. All of these ancient civilizations and others, a long time ago, started to assign significance to the cycles and positions of celestial bodies, trying to relate them to things happening on Earth, and this continued throughout the Middle Ages. For most of astrology's history, astrology and astronomy were synonymous. In other words, astrology was the best astronomy humans had. During this time, it's true that accurate observations of the stars and planets, what we think of as astronomy, was the foundation of astrology. And that's still true about astrology today to some degree, but astrology and astronomy began to split apart during the 17th and 18th centuries as more modern versions of science began developing and the supernatural claims made by astrology were challenged. So astrology was abandoned in the intellectual world, and astronomy has been firmly considered a separate, distinct discipline since the late 18th century. And this is worth noting, that the split between astrology and astronomy happened upon the emergence of the scientific method. That's not a coincidence. But it sort of makes sense that pre-science humans would think that the stars were sending the messages or influencing human affairs. Think about the last time you could see the stars clearly. It's awe-inspiring. Ancient cultures that didn't have natural explanations for what they were seeing would unsurprisingly invent their own explanations. Humans are programmed to make inferences about things they don't understand. So astrology is really just a way of thinking that is left over from outdated attempts at science. But don't get me wrong, astrology can be very intricate. It can seem scientific enough because tracking planets and constellations is something that real scientists do using complex equations and charts and a ton of math. And this is why many people are tricked into thinking astrology is science. But I could use formulas and math to track the blades of grass in a park to make predictions about the stock market. The formulas and math don't actually make it meaningful. Astrology believes the time of your birth and the position of celestial bodies at that time can determine your personality, strengths, weaknesses, compatibility with people born at other times, and more. Who you should befriend, who you should date, decisions you should make in life. And central to astrology are horoscopes, which make predictions about people's behavior and destinies based on where and when they were born, which determines what's known as their sun sign, like Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. We see horoscopes all over the place. Let's look at a random horoscope I found. I didn't cherry pick this. This was the first horoscope I found online. Quote, "Everyone looks to you for the answers today, but that doesn't rattle you at all. You're one cool customer, and nothing is going to get the better of you. Maybe it's healthy confidence or a bit of self-delusion. The reason for your grace under pressure is irrelevant. What matters is that you'll be there for the people who need you, and your actions will say everything that needs to be said." You could argue that what I just read is how most people feel on most days. The whole point is it's general enough for parts to apply to anyone and to seem relatable to anyone who reads it on any random day. There have been many experiments where a room full of people get the same horoscope, people with different astrological signs, and almost everybody in the room says the horoscope is accurate and relevant to their lives. People tend to rate claims about them as accurate if they're vague enough and if the person thinks that the claim was tailored to them. Separating the population into 12 signs that each get their own horoscope gives this illusion of a personally tailored claim. And the writers of horoscopes take advantage of what's called self-serving bias, where people agree more in general with flattering or positive descriptions of themselves or their situation. Horoscopes are rarely specific, and they almost never tell you about how horrible your day is going to be or what a bad person you are, even though bad days and bad people obviously exist. Check out your own horoscope for today on different websites and see how different they are. They're being written by people who are interpreting the sky in different ways. But even if all of the horoscopes were the same, it still wouldn't indicate that the position of the stars relative to when you were born had anything to do with what's happening in your life. And almost all modern Western astrology is derived from ancient Middle Eastern astrological traditions and involves some form of horoscope. An actual horoscope is a chart that diagrams the positions of the sun, moon, and planets and lets you track the angles that were created when you draw lines between them. You take that information and compare it to the exact time and place of a person's birth or some other event to make determinations about someone's innate characteristics or what will happen in the future. But astrology and horoscopes can get infinitely more complex and elaborate than newspaper horoscopes, depending on the astrologer. Astrologers are usually intimately familiar with astrology, and they charge people money for readings. Different astrologers have their own methods, and many astrologers claim that their methods are the right ones. Many people pay hundreds of bucks an hour to consult professional astrologers who often are also doubling as life coaches, using star and planetary charts to give advice about people's lives. There are many astrologers in the US that earn six-figure incomes. But let's ask ourselves, how could astrology even work? What bearing could the position of celestial bodies have on human affairs? Objects that are millions or even billions of miles away, how could their positions affect you at your birth, much less right now? And if you're thinking gravity, Carl Sagan once pointed out that the gravitational pull of the people in the room during your birth would affect you more than the gravitational pull of other planets in our solar system. Why don't we take into account the position of the other people who were standing in the room when you were born? Was your mom's OBGYN particularly heavy? That would have more gravitational impact than the position of a distant star or planet. And astrologers often even break things down to the hour that you were born. What's so special about the moment that you were born? Your biology had already been developing in your mother's womb for months. None of this survives even the most basic scrutiny. Consider there being two twins born at the same time in the same place. Same planets are in the same places when they're born. The sun is in the same place. Think about how likely it is that they will lead entirely different lives, have entirely different relationships with other people, have different challenges, different goals. One might even die young while the other lives on. Astrology wouldn't have known. In 1958, British scientists registered 2,000 babies born in early March. Their development was monitored. 110 relevant variables were measured at ages 11, 16, and 23, including relationship status, IQ test scores, teacher and parent ratings of behavior, height, weight, vision, hearing, self-ratings of ability with art, music, and sports. And the study found no evidence that these people had any characteristics in common that could be statistically correlated. And why would they? According to a 2013 Harris poll, 29% of Americans say they believe in astrology, and data from the National Science Foundation suggests that the number is increasing. Ronald Reagan's chief of staff has said that Nancy Reagan cleared some decisions with her personal astrologer. Astrology can be fun, it can be entertaining if that's how we use it, but it's not based in reality, and it's not a good mechanism for making important decisions. It can give us an overly fatalistic outlook on life when we assume that our destinies are predetermined by the time of year we were born. It can also give us false hope or an inflated sense of self or a false sense of doom. And we shouldn't ignore that it's a multi-million-dollar industry. Astrological readings are a massive waste of money. We are connected to the rest of the universe, and maybe that's what believers in astrology are recognizing. Maybe that's the principle that they're latching onto. Human bodies really are made of stardust, and that's pretty astonishing. And the sun does have a profound impact on human life. It allows life on Earth to exist with the light and the warmth that it provides. Why not just be captivated by that? But there is no evidence that we're connected to the rest of the universe in the way that astrology suggests. Given what we know about the universe today, it's actually a form of arrogance to think that humans are the focal point of the universe. It's a primitive superstition. There are plenty of mesmerizing truths about the universe and celestial bodies and how they relate to the earth and human life in ways that are scientifically justifiable. And maybe those are the facts we should be thinking about and be amazed by and fascinated with.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump is not going to like this. The new Mexican president-elect is going to be canceling an order of 8 military helicopters from the United States, planned to cost $1.36 billion. And the explanation is merely cost-cutting measures. This is something that the new Mexican president-elect ran on, but more than likely, this is going to be seen by Donald Trump as just yet another attack from our neighbors to the south, some of whom I assume are good people, and we need to start being treated fairly, and we're going to have to give them some good old-fashioned trade wars. And these helicopters were going to be manufactured by Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin is one of the main players in the military-industrial complex. And although this really is not, as far as we know, meant as a protest of the Trump regime, de facto, it is another one of these so-called attacks on the United States, the way that the Trumpian right sees things. And it genuinely does not seem like it is because of Donald Trump. It doesn't seem to even relate to U.S.-Mexico relations. It's just what the guy promised to do. But if you look online, the right-wingers are going crazy. They're demanding punishment of Mexico. And I'm reminded of that phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? If you're committed to the narrative that everybody is treating the United States unfairly, and everybody who does so or is perceived to be treating the United States unfairly needs to be punished, then every decision that's made by another country looks to you like an attack on the United States. Now, that being said, if you start thinking about what might happen more broadly if Donald Trump continues to alienate other countries the way that he's been doing, the military-industrial complex is going to suffer greatly, right? It's not going to be just whiskey and motorcycle manufacturers. And aside from what the helicopters coming from the United States to Mexico were going to cost, this is the right decision for Mexico, right? Like, aside from military-industrial complex stuff, aside from U.S.-Mexico relations stuff, there's massive poverty in Mexico. The economy has improved there, and we do have now a net outflow to Mexico because the economy has improved. But there are still major economic problems in Mexico. Spending $1.36 billion on American helicopters to protect elite politicians and do whatever else they were going to do with them, it's not the best look. So I think that completely aside from whether you want to support or not an American helicopter company or a French helicopter company or whatever, this is a good decision.
Yeah, and military spending through defense contractors is a bottomless pit, and we've been falling down that pit for a long time now here in the United States.
Do you think that the military-industrial complex at some point, which has such clout in the United States, will start speaking out against Trump's foreign policy once it starts to hurt them? Because a lot of contractor dollars come from foreign policy, and they come from relationships with other countries. If Trump starts alienating other countries such that they say, well, then we'll get our helicopters somewhere else, or we'll get our bombs somewhere else. I'm not up to speed on everybody who manufactures this stuff, but there are places other than the U.S. You might see an industry that has a natural alignment with the Republican Party, the military-industrial complex, saying, we are against what Donald Trump is doing.
Well, maybe. It would be playing with fire, though, because Trump and the Republicans have increased military spending so significantly. But we will see that pushback from the right on trade, like the Koch brothers are against these tariffs, for example.
Yeah, and that are the Koch brothers still considered libertarian? Kind of, right? I mean, at this,
they're free trade people.
What is libertarian even at this point? But yeah, they I guess under the idea that they are, yes, they are more in the total free trade side of the American right than some of these other elements. The new president in Mexico, the president-elect, is realizing that these are corrupt, crony capitalist deals. He campaigned on cutting this stuff, and he's doing it, and it's kind of like refreshingly simple and straightforward.
Well, you know what I think it is? $1.36 billion, that's a lot of money. Maybe he's saving up to pay for the cost of the U.S.-Mexican border wall.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. He very clever. I like that one. I'm very interested in getting down to Mexico soon. My travel to Mexico has mostly been, going to these beach areas where you just hang out, and it is Mexico, and you get to see some stuff. I've been to Chichen Itza. I've been to some other historical sites, sort of in the Yucatan area. I love the Mexican people, but it hasn't been like the authentic Mexican experience overall. There are now nonstop daily flights from Boston direct to Mexico City.
There you go.
And I would be very interested in visiting Mexico City, although we know that I don't do great with the elevation, and I think Mexico City is at like 10,000 feet.
How many people live there? It's the biggest city in this side of the world.
Billions of people.
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge, huge cities. So yeah, I'm interested in visiting as soon as possible. And some friends of mine have recently been, and they said they just had a fantastic time. It's no secret to many in our audience that I don't like Papa John's pizza, and I don't like Papa John Schnatter. Schnatter, I don't even know how his last name is pronounced. He's the guy from Papa John's Pizza. He's got a lot of money, worth reportedly nearly $1 billion on the basis of selling very, very bad pizza. He's an uninformed ideological clown. And you might remember back during the Obamacare debate, John Schnatter opposed it. He said, my pizzas would have to get like 10 to 15 cents more expensive unless I wanted to just like lose 10 to 15 cents of profit if I were to give everybody health care on the basis of what Obamacare would dictate. And of course, I said at the time, wait a second. You're saying that if you rather charged 15 cents more on your pizzas, everybody would get health care. That would make me more likely to go and get pizza from Papa John's. That would be a really good thing, but he didn't like it. That wasn't something that he wanted. Then during the NFL national anthem kneeling protests, he criticized the players who were kneeling because what his sort of hypothesis was that the kneeling generated bad press for the NFL and thus made it so that his advertisements for Papa John's Pizza in partnership with the NFL weren't as effective at getting him business, which is a really great way to excuse the fact that your pizza's terrible. John Schnatter has now resigned after using a racial slur during a conference call, and Papa John's stock price has been falling as a result. And this happened a couple months ago during a conference call where Schnatter said the N-word in the context of, I guess he was complaining that other fast food founders had used the N-word and didn't suffer consequences. And I guess that was like upsetting to him, or he found it to be hypocritical or some kind of double standard. He also told a story during this same conference call about how back in Indiana, where he grew up, people would sometimes drag black people from trucks attached to ropes until they died, which is a really weird story to tell during a corporate pizza conference call. It's even funnier that this all happened during a media training initiative, and the company that had been retained by Papa John's to do the media training immediately quit and said, yeah, we're not going to be able to work with this guy. It's like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. One thing after another just going wrong here.
Yeah, were these like action items for him? We're going to talk about media training, then we're going to get to, the cost of pizza dough, and then the racial slurs will follow from that.
Full damage control is now going on. Papa John's saying what Schnatter said was inappropriate, but rest assured, the views of Schnatter don't reflect the views of the organization. And I am genuinely curious, does anybody who listens to or watches the David Pakman Show go to Papa John's Pizza? And if you do, I want to know why you go there instead of a local pizza place. My understanding is that the price difference between Papa John's Pizza and local pizza is not that drastic. And I think that there are Papa John's in Boston, but I couldn't tell you where.
No idea.
You don't know either. When you were at Domino's Pizza, Pat,
yes,
was there a rivalry between Domino's and Papa John's?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Was there really?
Yeah, if the two drivers cross paths, you do not want to see what happened. It was really bad.
It seems like the pizza, when I last tried it, which was years ago in Western Massachusetts when I had some friends that would order, it seemed like it was marginally better than Domino's at the time, but I know that since Domino's has kind of like rebranded, so I don't know at this point where the quality.
How dare you say that, David? We strived for mediocrity at Domino's, and Papa John's does not even compare.
I've spoken to someone who says their family knows John Schnatter down in wherever it is. That I think he's based in like Kentucky or something like that, and that privately, this is allegedly, John Schnatter admits to how terrible the pizza is, but he still managed to become almost a billionaire selling bad pizza.
I mean, if he is a billionaire or almost a billionaire, you'd have to imagine that his taste buds have gone up with his net worth.
Yes.
And so he would no longer like his own pizza.
Yeah, he wouldn't be caught dead at a Papa John's place. He is only going to get artisanal vegan pizza at this point, no doubt about that. All right, so anyway, you know, I take some pleasure in the fact that a bad person has finally had somewhat of a fall from grace, but he still is going to make a ton of money off of this thing, and he's going to be just fine. So in the end, who really wins and loses here? I don't know. The losers are the people eating the pizza. That's who I really feel bad for. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting voicemail I received. Take a listen.
Hello, David. This is Travis from California. I was just calling to get your opinion on what happens next. If Mueller actually brings charges against Trump, if he shows the evidence that Trump is guilty of something and no one acts, what happens next?
Nothing.
What precedent is set going forward?
Yep. Well, this is...
thank you. Bye.
Thank you. This is something I've been talking about, which is that at this point, Mueller has been sufficiently smeared to the point that if you don't have a Democratic House and Senate as a result of the November 2018 election, probably nothing happens to Trump. And we already have increasingly confirmed from a legal perspective that you can't indict a sitting president, meaning that in order to really get charges to have consequences against Trump, you would need to first impeach him. Republicans have made it pretty clear they're just not going to impeach him. There's no political appetite for that.
Yeah, and the Republican smear tactics against Robert Mueller are working. I guess the investigation is not as popular as it once was.
Correct.
It's almost 50-50 when it comes to popularity.
Yeah, so the answer is, unless you vote in November and get Democrats elected to the House and Senate to the point that Democrats take control, nothing is going to happen. And more than likely, even some of the people who have been indicted or may be indicted are just going to get pardoned. And I wish that it was something else, but if anything, this should be even more motivation to actually get out there and vote in November. On today's bonus show, what a bonus show we have today. We will talk about the willingness of American workers to quit their jobs has hit a 17-year high. Is this as simple as when the economy is good and there's low unemployment, people feel confident that they could quickly find another job, even though that is actually counterintuitive? When there are fewer unemployed people, that also often means that there aren't necessarily that many available jobs because most people are working. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We will also talk about a new study which shows that virtual reality turns out to be pretty effective at curing some real-life fears, including the fear of heights. And we will also talk about a move in Alabama to limit sheriffs from pocketing jail food money. Seems like something you want to prevent sheriffs from doing, right?
Yeah, how is that ever allowed in the first place?
That is a really good question. And we will discuss whether it is a problem just in Alabama or whether Alabama is sort of ahead of the curve in curbing a problem that exists all over the country. 2 ways to access the bonus show: become a member at www.joinpakman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.